Hi everyone and welcome back to my video. Today I'm going to show you how to purl using your left hand as a yarn tensioner, and that is called Continental style purling. This was the hardest one for me to figure out, and just so you know, there are several different ways to do this. This is just the way that works best for me. I watched 100 different tutorials probably when I first started knitting to try and figure out how to knit Continental style and do the purl stitch. This is the easiest one I found, but please feel free to look around and find what works best for you. So just really quickly, if you've been following me along in my knitting tutorials, you know by now what the stitches look like, but just a quick recap. This side over here with all these pretty little V's is what the knitted side of a material looks like. This is called stockinette, where it's just all knit. This back side over here is purl bumps, and this is what we're going to be working on today. It's obviously very different. You can see these little horizontal bumps on here, and those are your purl stitches. You can also see them right here along your needle. And so when you're doing a pattern, if you can't remember if you're knitting or purling, you can always look at what's right here on your needle, and if it's this little bump right here, kind of horizontal bump, you know that it's a purl stitch. And if it's kind of this little V looking guy right here, you know it's a knit stitch. Today we're going to be working on purl stitch, Continental style. Like I said, Continental style means that you are tensioning the yarn with your left hand. There's several different ways to do this. I'm going to show you what works best for me. So now as far as tensioning goes, you can do whatever works for you. I like to tension around my pinky. Sometimes if my pinky gets tired, I will tension around my third finger. Just depends on what works best for you. I'm going to go ahead and do my pinky right now. So I lay the yarn over my pinky, kind of underneath it and back up, and then I put it underneath or on top of my first finger in between my nail and like my knuckle here. And that's just kind of how I hold it. The other thing that has really helped me with my Continental knitting is to keep my first finger really close to the tip of my knitting needle. I don't do this business where my finger is clear out here and I've got this huge strand of yarn now. I can't keep it tensioned that way. It just doesn't work out very well for me. So I like to keep these two really close together. Now for purling, I mentioned when you're knitting, the yarn is going to be coming out from the back of your work. For purling, you want the yarn coming out the front of your work. So for this first stitch, you might have to just kind of pull this yarn down just a little bit so your finger doesn't pull it over. But we're going to insert our needle from the right to the left. Our tips are going to be pointing the opposite directions, and we're going to come in the front. So when you're knitting, you're actually going left to right, and you kind of come out behind it. Well, this is exactly the opposite. So left to right, coming out in the front. And then for this first stitch, I usually kind of hold it on here a little bit so it doesn't fall off. It's just the hardest one to kind of finagle. And then we're going to take our yarn with our first finger of our left hand, and the yarn's going to go around counterclockwise. So we're going to kind of do this motion. And this is usually where I would tend to lose it when I was starting. It would just slide off my finger right there, like I didn't have anything to keep it on my finger. And so what I have found works the best is go ahead and put my needle in. I'll hang on to this first stitch, like I said, with my first finger over here. And then I wrap the yarn around counterclockwise, and then I'll kind of grab my yarn and just push down on it so that I've got this tension underneath my yarn. And that is what helps me then be able to pull that stitch through, and then you can pull it off. Okay, so now once you get that first stitch done, it's the easiest one. So let's go ahead and keep going. Now, as you'll notice, my yarn is in front again, but now it kind of has this needle to stop it from going over, and our other stitches over here. So let's go ahead and do another one. So you're going to want make sure that the yarn is again in front of your needle. So I go in kind of behind my working yarn and through that stitch. And then again, I bring my finger down, and that kind of pulls it through. Okay. Now my yarn came on the back, so make sure your yarn goes to the front, and it also needs to be in front of your right hand needle as well. Okay, so just make sure your working yarn is in front of both needles, and again, place your right needle in through your stitch from right to left, wrap it around. The yarn is, if you'll notice by the way, is already kind of wrapped around now once you've gotten past that first stitch. So you really just need to finish wrapping it around and pull it down, and then you can pull that stitch off. Okay, and if you pull it off in such a way, as you get better, you'll pull it off so that this yarn stays. If your yarn pops behind your needle here, just using your right hand, you can kind of move it around. Once you get used to this style, it actually works quite nicely. It's just kind of finicky at first, in my opinion. Okay, so again, we're going to insert our right needle through our stitch, wrap our yarn around, and pull it off. Okay, make sure our yarn's in front, and we're just going to kind of keep going with that motion. So pull it in, wrap the yarn around, and off, and just keep doing that. Now as you practice this, you will get faster and faster. I am honestly still working on this style. This is not my go-to style, but one thing that really did help me was to know that I need to pull this thread down, this yarn down with my first finger, and that really helped me out because it was falling off every time I tried to pick it up. Because so here we go. Now sometimes it does fall off, just grab it again. If you have to, let go, re-tension your thread if it gets too loose. And the other thing, if I notice this thread is getting loose, I'll kind of hang on to it with my first finger here as well. With this method, I found that practice is really what's going to, oops, I dropped my stitch off. Okay, now kind of like when you're knitting, if your stitch comes off, don't worry about it. Just put it right back over on there, okay? And then just you can keep going. And that probably is gonna happen to you, honestly. This purling, in my opinion, Continental style is a little bit finicky, and it just takes some practice, especially when you get down here to the last stitch because it's super loose and it just wants to slide off your needles. Okay, all right, so there is one more row of purl stitches done Continental style. I'm going to knit this row really quick just so we can get back to a purl side. If you're practicing, I suggest you just continue purling. After all, it's just practice. If you mess up, it's no big deal. You're just trying to get the motion down. Okay, I just knit down the other side just so that we can get back to a purl side again. And as you'll notice, my yarn is coming out the front where we want it. You do not want it coming out the back. If you try and do that, it will loop over and make an extra loop here, and your work will just get bigger and bigger and bigger. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and tension our yarn. And again, I like to keep my yarn right in between my fingernail and my knuckle there. And for this first stitch, we want the yarn coming out the front. So like I said before, it was kind of just finicky. Okay. And then we're going to wrap it around counterclockwise and pull down with our first finger and then slide that off. Again, make sure your yarn is in the front of your working needles. Wrap it around and pull it off. And this is the motion. You can watch this video over and over if you want. You can use this hand to kind of help hold things on. Once you get a little bit better, you won't have to do that. This finger, this left-hand finger will do most of the work for you. Okay. So that is it. That is how you do the Continental stitch, purl stitch. And like I said, there are other ways. This is just the one that works best for me. So whatever works best for you. I just suggest that you practice, maybe commit doing Continental, tensioning your yarn in your left hand for a project. And the more practice that you do with it, the better you'll get. So there we are. Oops. All right, so there we are. Those are our purl stitches on this side, and this is kind of what the other side looks like. Every time you're doing a purl stitch on one side, it's creating a knit stitch on the opposite side. If you're doing a knit stitch on one side, it's creating a purl stitch on the opposite side. So that is how you purl Continental style, holding the yarn in your left hand. I hope that helps some of you out. Like I said, there are a lot of different ways to do it. I'm typically a right hand flicker, and so this is not my normal style. However, I have been working hard to try and get used to that. A lot of people think that that Continental style knitting is faster. I've also seen people who knit really fast with their right hands as well. I think it's good to learn both techniques. That way, if you're doing color work, you can tension one yarn in your right hand and one yarn in your left hand, and it makes it really nice and easy. So I think they're both worth practicing, but of course, do what works best for you. Thank you so much for joining me for this video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, can you please make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up? That way I know to keep making these videos for you. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you next time.